My parents sold my 11-year-old daughter's antique cello for $87,000 and then used the cash to build a pool for my sister's kids. When I confronted them, they told me to be grateful. Then my grandmother smiled, not cried, and said one sentence that destroyed them right there in public. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments. And I will give you a heart. They acted like I was the selfish one for being upset, and I'm not saying that for drama. I'm saying it because that is literally what happened on paper with a wire transfer and a brand new hole ripped into their backyard where the grass used to be. And I need you to picture this the way it felt in real time, because it didn't start with a screaming fight. It started with a smell, that sharp chemical smell of fresh paint and cut lumber. The kind of smell that tells you somebody changed. Something expensive without asking permission. And I remember standing on my parents' porch with my car key still in my hand thinking, why does the air feel like a cover-up? And Mia was beside me bouncing on the balls of her feet with her music binder hugged to her chest like a Bible. Excited in that quiet kid way where you can see their whole mind already playing the first note before they even touch the strings. And she goes, "Mom, do you think Great Nana will be here today?" And I said, "Not today, baby, she's at her new place." And Mia nodded like she understood, but her eyes still held that stubborn hope kids have, like hope is a habit you don't break until adults force you to. And we walked inside because I still had a key to the house, not because I was treasured, because I was useful, because I was the one who shows up, the one who runs errands, the one who plays peacekeeper. And the second the door opened, I heard it, that muffled whine of power tools, and I saw blue painters. Tape like little boundaries stuck to the walls by people who don't respect real boundaries, and Mia whispered, "Are they fixing the music room?" And I didn't answer fast enough because my brain did that slow buffering thing when reality doesn't match the script. So I just said, "Let's go get your cello." And we walked down the hallway toward what used to be Great Nana Eleanor's music room, her sanctuary. The one room in that house that felt like it had rules and softness and temperature control. And a little humidifier humming like a promise. And the important part is this. Mia's cello didn't live with us because our apartment is small and walls are thin and neighbors complain. And because an antique instrument doesn't belong near a radiator or shoved behind a couch. And Eleanor had set that room up like a vault. Not because she was dramatic, because she'd lived long enough to know people get weird around valuable things. And she always said it like a warning with a little half smile. Money doesn't change people, sweetheart, it reveals them. And I thought I understood that until I didn't, because when I pushed open that music room door, the first thing I noticed was the humidifier still running, like the room was still doing its job, and the stand was still there, like it was still waiting, and the exact corner where the hard case always sat, where Mia's cello always rested like it belonged to her, was empty, not moved, not put away, not we relocated it for safety, just gone. And Mia didn't scream. She didn't cry. She froze so hard it made my chest ache, and then she walked to the corner slowly, like she was approaching a wild animal that might bite, and she looked behind the chair, then at the shelf, then back down at the bare floor like the floor was going to confess, and then she turned her face up to me, with that careful little voice kids use when they're trying not to get in trouble for needing something, and she asked, "Did Great Nana change her mind?" And I felt my throat tighten because the cruelty of that question is that it blames the child first, like the world must have done this because the child wasn't good enough. And I said, "No, baby," and she swallowed and she asked, "Then where is it?" And there was no anger in her, just confusion wrapped in politeness. And I realized right there that if I didn't handle this right, my daughter would learn the same lesson I learned in that house, which is that your needs are inconvenient, so you shrink. So I told her, "Wait here, okay, let me check." And I walked out before she could see my face change, because my hands were already shaking, and I marched toward the kitchen where my mother Diane always positioned herself when she wanted to look like the family's backbone, phone in one hand, mug in the other, hair pulled back like she'd been so busy doing so much. And my father Frank was at the table scrolling on a tablet, like the world would always make room for him. And my sister, Kayla was perched on a stool sipping something green and smug, like she paid rent with attitude. And I didn't ease into it. I didn't ask politely. I said, "Where's Mia's cello?" And my mother blinked slow, like I had interrupted a sacred ritual, and she goes, "Good morning to you too, Tessa." And my father sighed like I was a recurring subscription he forgot to cancel, and he said, "What's the problem now?" And I repeated it slower, because sometimes you have to talk to your own parents like they're playing dumb on purpose. "Mia's cello, where is it?" And Kayla let out this little snort without looking up and said, "Oh my God," like I was being dramatic. And my mother took a sip of her coffee like the answer would taste better if she delayed it. And then she said the phrase that should have warned me like an alarm, "Your father handled it." And I felt something cold crawl up my spine, because handled it in my family translates to, we did what we wanted, and we're not taking feedback. And I said, "Handled it how?" And my father finally looked up and said, calm as a man explaining taxes, "We sold it." And I swear the entire house went quiet, like even the walls were listening. And I said, "You sold it." And he nodded like it was normal. It was valuable. It was sitting there. Your grandmother isn't even using it. And my mouth went dry because the way he framed it was so slick, like he was doing the responsible adult thing. And I said, "It wasn't yours. It was set aside for Mia." Eleanor was clear. And Kayla finally looked up, eyes bright with annoyance, and she goes, "She's 11. Like that was a legal argument. And my mother set her mug down with this soft little clink and said, "Don't start." And I said, "Don't start? You sold my daughter's cello." And my father leaned back like I was exhausting him and said, "It's a family asset." And I remember staring at him thinking, the audacity of calling something a family asset after you've spent years treating me like I'm not fully family. And I said, "No, it was a trust gift for her." And Kayla waved toward the back window, toward the torn up yard, and she said, "And my kids deserve what? Chopped liver." And this is the part where I need you to hear the hypocrisy. Clearly, because her kids already had everything, the attention, the praise, the chaos pass, that they're just kids excuses, while Mia was expected to be quiet and grateful and small. And my mother did this little matriarch wave and said, "We're doing something nice for the children." And I said, "Lucy is a child." And she corrected me like my daughter was a typo, Mia. And then she repeated it again, "The children," meaning Kayla's kids, not mine. And my father rubbed his forehead like he was tired of me being a person and said, "Your daughter will be fine with a student cello. You can rent one." And that sentence right there is the family prayer, "She'll be fine," which is just a polite way of saying, we're not paying the emotional bill for what we did. And I asked quieter now because my voice was starting to break, "Who did you sell it to?" And my father shrugged, "A collector, paid by wire, quick sale." And my mother leaned forward, eyes sharp now, and said, "And before you get any ideas, you are not telling your grandmother." Like the real crime was the truth getting out. And right here, pause with me for a second, because I want to know if you've ever had that moment where you realize the people closest to you aren't worried about doing right, they're worried about getting caught. And if you're watching this, tell me where you're watching from, city and country, because I swear these family dynamics show up everywhere, and I want to see if this is hitting you in the same place it hit me. And then my daughter was still down the hall standing in that empty corner like she was waiting for permission to matter. So I walked back to Mia, and I knelt, and I held her hands, and I said, "We're going home." And she didn't argue. She didn't ask to stay. She just nodded, and that broke me more than tears would have, because it meant she was already learning to accept losing things quietly. And when we walked out, my mother called after me, "Tessa, don't you dare call Eleanor." And I didn't answer because I knew I was going to. And that night Mia tried practicing on a battered student cello her teacher kept for emergencies. And it sounded thin and wrong, like a cardboard box with strings, and Mia didn't complain. She adjusted her posture, like she always does, focused, tried again, and every time the sound came out flat, she blinked hard like she was holding something inside, and finally she set the bow down and said, gentle like she was trying to comfort me, I can still practice, it's just harder. And I wanted to scream because my child was already negotiating with loss like it was normal. And then she said the sentence that made my stomach go still. Maybe great Nana didn't mean for it to be mine yet. And that's when I knew this wasn't just about an instrument. It was about identity, about a kid who was starting to think love and gifts and belonging can be revoked if you inconvenience the wrong adults. And I sat at my kitchen table staring at my phone, remembering Eleanor's warning. People get strange around valuable things. And realizing she wasn't talking about strangers, she was talking about my parents. And I thought about the way my mom said, "Don't tell her," with that tight voice. Not "don't upset her," but "don't tell her." And I understood the game they wanted me to play. Keep the secret, keep the peace. Let them enjoy the pool while my daughter learns to swallow it. And something in me snapped into a clean, quiet decision. Not rage, not a meltdown, a decision, because I am not raising Mia to believe she has to be small to be loved. So the next morning I drove to Eleanor's new place, and the building smelled like lemon cleaner and expensive soap and false calm. And the receptionist smiled like nothing in the universe was on fire. And Eleanor was in the lounge with a book in her lap and her glasses perched like she was about to judge the author personally. And the second she looked up at me, she said, "Sit down. Your face is doing that thing." And I sat and I told her, simple and straight, the missing cello, the pool, the phrases they used, family asset, she'll be fine, don't tell grandma. And Eleanor didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just listened like someone collecting evidence. And when I finished, she closed her book slowly and asked one question that told me she was already 5 moves ahead. "Do you have the documentation file?" And I said, "You showed me months ago." And she nodded once and she leaned forward and said, "Good. Now screenshot everything Kayla posted, get pictures of the backyard and don't warn them." And I stared at her and whispered, "Grandma, are you okay?" And she looked at me over her glasses and said, "I'm fine. But your parents are about to learn the difference between family and access." And then she reached for her phone and made a call in that calm voice that feels like a door locking. And when she hung up, she squeezed my hand and said, "Go home. Be with Mia. Let her practice. And let the adults who made this mess enjoy their little victory while it lasts." And I drove home with my heart pounding because I didn't know exactly what Eleanor was doing, but I knew this much. She wasn't going to yell. She was going to expose, and in my family, exposure is the one thing they can't survive. The weirdest part after that call was how nothing exploded right away, because when you grow up in a family like mine, you're trained to think consequences come with shouting and slammed doors and dramatic exits. But Eleanor doesn't do drama. She does paperwork. She does timing. She does that quiet kind of power that doesn't look dangerous until it's already too late to undo. And for the next few weeks, the world stayed annoyingly normal on the outside, while my stomach lived in a constant low grade boil. Because Mia still had school, I still had work, bills still showed up like they didn't care my kid had been robbed, and my mother still texted me like we were just having a minor disagreement about brunch, not a felony disguised as family. And every day Mia practiced on that rental cello we scraped together, and she never once complained, which honestly made me angrier than if she had screamed, because her silence was the proof that she'd started doing what girls like her learn to do early: adapt, adjust, don't ask for too much, don't make grown-ups uncomfortable. And the sound of that rental cello was fine in a technical way, but it didn't bloom, it didn't sing, it didn't have that warm, living voice Eleanor's cello had, and Mia knew it. You could see it in the way she'd pause after a note, like she was waiting for the instrument to answer back the way her real one did, and it wouldn't. And she'd just blink hard and keep going like discipline could fix loss. And at night, when she thought I wasn't listening, I'd hear her in her room scrolling through old videos of herself playing at Eleanor's house. Not the fancy recital clips, the messy practice ones where she's laughing because she missed a note and Eleanor says something like, "Your left hand is gossiping again." And Mia giggles and fixes it. And I'd stand in the hallway feeling like I was watching my child grieve a piece of herself while my parents posted pool updates like they were saints for buying chlorine. Because yes, of course they posted. My sister Kayla posted like it was her job. Progress, with smiling emojis and a photo of concrete forms, then almost there, with a picture of my dad holding a measuring tape like he invented math, and my mother commented under every post with some fake wholesome line like anything for the grandbabies. And the part that made me feel sick was that nobody even tried to hide where the money came from, because to them, taking from my child didn't register as theft. It registered as redistribution, like my kid was the family's emergency fund. And I kept waiting for Eleanor's emotion to turn into something I could see, and it didn't, not at first, which is exactly how manipulation works too. By the way, people think abuse is loud, but the most effective betrayal is quiet and confident, because it makes you doubt your own reaction. It makes you wonder if you're being dramatic, and I had little moments where I'd catch myself thinking, maybe I should just let it go. Maybe Mia will be fine. Maybe the cello was too fancy anyway, and then I'd see Mia's fingers practicing calluses into her skin on an instrument that didn't belong to her, and I'd snap back to reality, because no, this wasn't about fancy. It was about adults deciding a child's future was optional if it benefited the right children. And during that waiting period, my mother tried to do what she always does when she senses she might face consequences. She tried to smooth it over with performance. She sent Mia a little gift bag with Music Girl stickers and a cheap bracelet that said dream. Like, she thought a $5 trinket could replace $87,000 and an heirloom, and Kayla sent me a voice note that started with, "Okay, so don't freak out," which is always how people begin when they are about to say something you should absolutely freak out about. And she said, "The kids are just so excited, and we can all enjoy it, and Mia will love swimming. And honestly, you're making this bigger than it needs to be." And I remember staring at my phone thinking, it's incredible how comfortable you are spending my kids' money while calling me unreasonable. And I didn't reply, because if I replied, I would have said something that would have made me sound like the villain in a family that already rehearsed my villain role. And then the invitation came, not to me personally, not, "Hey, we miss you," not, "We need to talk." It popped into the family group chat like a flyer slapped onto a pole. Barbecue Saturday, 2 p.m. pool. Reveal, bring a side if you're coming. And that was it. No apology, no mention of Mia's cello, just logistics, because in my family emotions are optional but potato salad is mandatory, and Mia saw it over my shoulder, and her face didn't change, which was its own kind of heartbreak because kids get excited about pools and Mia used to, but now she looked at that invite like it was a reminder of what she lost. And she asked, small voice, "Are we going?" And I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Because I didn't know yet if going would protect her or hurt her more, and that night, I barely slept because my brain wouldn't stop replaying the moment in the music room, the empty corner, the way Mia's hand moved toward the stand and then pulled back like she touched a hot stove, and early the next morning my phone rang, and it was Eleanor, calm as ever, and she didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask if I was upset. She said one sentence like she was setting a calendar appointment. "We're going." On Saturday, and I swallowed and said, "Grandma, what are you doing?" And she said, "I'm doing what I should have done sooner." And I tried to ask more, but she cut in with that gentle steel voice. "I don't want Mia watching you swallow this." And that sentence hit me because it wasn't just about the cello. It was about the lesson my family tried to teach me my whole life. That peace means silence. And Eleanor was saying no. Peace means protection. And then she said, "It's moving." And I said, "What is?" And she said, "The cello." And my heart kicked like I'd missed a stair step. And I said, "You found it." And she didn't give me the satisfaction yet. She just said, "You'll see soon enough." And after that call, the days crawled. Because waiting for justice in real life is not cinematic. It's just you trying to function while your nerves stay tight. And I watched Mia carefully, not hovering, but noticing. Noticing how she started asking permission before speaking. Noticing how she stopped volunteering to play for friends. Noticing how she made herself smaller at my parents' house even when we weren't even going there. Because kids internalize the rules of places even when they're not in them. and I had to fight my own instincts to keep the peace, because keeping the peace in a rigged family is just agreeing to lose quietly. And then Saturday came with that oppressive heat that makes you feel like you're breathing through a wet towel. Perfect pool weather, and Mia wore her swimsuit under her clothes because hope is stubborn at 11 even when trust isn't. And on the drive over, she stared out the window, and I could tell she was rehearsing how to behave. Polite, quiet, grateful. And that made me want to turn the car around and drive until the road ran out. But I didn't, because if we didn't show up, my parents would control the story again. They'd tell everyone I was dramatic, ungrateful, jealous, keeping Mia away out of spite. And I was done letting them narrate my life. So we pulled up, and the street was lined with cars, relatives, neighbors, people my parents collect like props to prove they're good people, and the backyard looked like a brochure. The water shining, the deck spotless, the pergola with string lights like they watched one home show and decided they were experts, and Kayla's kids were already in the pool screaming with joy. And everyone laughed because loud kids are adorable when they're the chosen ones, and my mother stood near the grill with that practiced matriarch posture, and my dad hovered like a man whose choices had just been validated by chlorine. And when Mia and I walked through the gate, my mother's smile flickered, just a split second, irritation disguised as warmth, and she said too brightly, "There you are." And I said, "Hi." And Kayla looked Mia up and down like she was checking if Mia came with an apology attached. And Mia nodded politely, because she's a good kid raised by someone who still believes manners matter even when other people don't deserve them. And I watched Mia's eyes drift to the pool, then down to her hands, and I knew she was doing the math without numbers. Her cello equals their pool, and that is a brutal equation for a child to carry. And then my dad clapped his hands and announced food was almost ready. And my mother did this little speech about making memories for the kids, and people applauded. And Kayla raised her glass and said, "To family." And I swear I felt my jaw clench, because family is a word people use when they want you to accept injustice with a smile. And someone asked casually, "Where's Eleanor?" And my mother answered too fast, "She's resting." And that's when the gate clicked behind us and the air changed. Not because a fight started, but because authority arrived, and I turned and saw Eleanor walking in calm as a judge. Crisp blouse, steady spine. And beside her was a man in a suit carrying a slim folder, and I didn't know exactly what was in that folder yet, but I knew this. My parents' faces went pale in the exact same way liars go pale when the truth walks into the room holding receipts. Eleanor didn't walk in like someone coming to join the fun. She walked in like someone coming to collect what's hers. And it was almost funny how quickly the backyard turned into a room full of people suddenly fascinated by their own shoes. Because everyone loves gossip until the gossip starts naming names. And my mother's smile did this strained little twitch like her face was trying to keep up with her lies. And my dad, the man who always acts like he owns any space he stands in, actually took a step back without realizing it. And Kayla's voice came out too high and too bright. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Like Eleanor had wandered in by accident instead of being invited by reality. And Eleanor looked around at the pool, the pergola, the perfect little setup, and she nodded once like she was inspecting a poorly built shed. Then she said pleasantly, "Well, you've been busy," and you could hear a few nervous chuckles from people who didn't know if they were allowed to laugh. Because Eleanor's tone wasn't angry. It was worse than angry. It was calm. And calm in a family like mine means the decision has already been made. And my mother tried to rescue it with performance. "This is a party, Eleanor." And Eleanor nodded again. "I know. That's why I came." And then she turned her head and her eyes landed on Mia. And I watched Mia straighten like her body recognized safety before her brain did. And for half a second, Eleanor softened. Just a flash. Then she looked back at my parents and said the sentence that made the entire backyard stop breathing. "I heard you sold the cello." And the silence was instant, like someone hit mute on the whole scene. And my mother did the classic move liars do when the truth arrives. She tried to reframe it as concern. We didn't want to upset you. And Eleanor didn't even blink, she said. You didn't want consequences. And my dad cleared his throat and tried to pull rank. Let's talk inside. And Eleanor smiled, not kindly, more like amused. Thomas, you've had plenty of inside time. And the guy in the suit, her lawyer, stepped forward just enough for people to notice him, but not enough to look like he was threatening anyone, which honestly is the scariest kind of professional, the kind who doesn't need to posture. And Kayla jumped in like she always does when she senses she might lose control of the narrative. Okay, this is ridiculous, it was. Just sitting there, and the kids needed something nice. And Eleanor's eyes flicked to Kayla like she was a stain on a white shirt. Lucy is a kid, she said, and Kayla opened her mouth and then closed it because she realized she just accidentally confirmed the whole moral rot out loud. And my mother tried the next excuse. We didn't know there was any paperwork. We didn't know it was special. And Eleanor said, correct. You didn't know because you weren't supposed to. And my stomach tightened because that was the first hint that there was something deeper than just sentimental ownership. And my dad's face hardened in that way men do when their authority gets questioned in front of witnesses. Where is it? He asked, and there it was. Not, did we hurt Mia? Not, how do we fix this? Just, where is it? Like he was worried about the asset, not the child. And Eleanor looked at Mia again and then back at him. And she said, safe. And Mia's breath caught, a tiny sound like relief trying to escape. And the backyard shifted because now even the bystanders realized this wasn't just a fight. This was a retrieval, and my mother's voice shook. Eleanor, please. And Eleanor held up one hand, palm out, and said, I won't keep you long, I know you're here to swim. And that line was so polite it felt like an insult. And then she nodded to her lawyer, and he opened the folder and pulled out a set of documents. Crisp, official, the kind of paper that doesn't care how you feel. And Eleanor said, let's make this simple. And she spoke to my parents like she was explaining something to adults who were pretending to be confused. That cello was held for Mia. And my mom blinked. Held how? And Eleanor's voice stayed even. Held in trust. And I felt my spine go cold because my parents had not just crossed a boundary. They'd stepped over a legal line and poured the evidence into a swimming pool. And my dad's mouth opened and nothing came out for a second. And Kayla actually laughed, a sharp, ugly laugh. A trust, come on. And Eleanor turned her head slowly. I am the trustee, she said. Mia is the beneficiary. And you could practically hear people's brains rearranging themselves around that information, because now it wasn't family drama. It was stole from a child, and my mother tried to play innocent. We didn't know, and Eleanor nodded again. No, you didn't, and that was by design. And then she added, almost casually, I documented the instrument, appraisal, serial identifiers, photographs, insurance, everything. And she paused and looked around at the crowd like she wanted them to understand the moral of the story. I've been alive long enough to know people get strange around valuable things. And then she added, dry as dust. Apparently I'm related to some of them. And a couple people snorted before they caught themselves. Because even in a tense moment, people can't resist a clean hit of truth. And my dad tried one last pivot. We improved the property. And Eleanor's eyes narrowed just slightly. You improved your comfort with money that wasn't yours in a house that isn't yours. And that's when I noticed the lawyer wasn't just holding one packet. He had multiple, and my chest tightened because I knew what that meant before he said it. And he stepped forward and offered the papers like a waiter offering a bill no one wants to pay. And he said calmly, notice to vacate, 60 days. And my mother made a sound. Like she'd been slapped. No. And my dad's face went gray, and Kayla snatched her copy like she could rip the consequences in half if she tore hard enough. You're kicking us out, she snapped, and Eleanor tilted her head, almost curious. You're acting surprised. That's the part one don't understand. And my mother's voice started to wobble into pleading. Mom, this is my home. And Eleanor corrected her with one quiet sentence that felt like a door locking. It is the house you live in. And the difference between those two sentences landed on everyone because my home is emotion and the house you live in is fact. And Kayla swung her anger toward me because of course she did. This is because of you. And Eleanor cut her off without looking at me. No, she said. This is because you sold a child's instrument and poured the money into a pool like it was Monopoly. And my dad's voice cracked, not with guilt, with panic. Where's the cello? And Eleanor finally gave the first real payoff. Recovered, she said, this morning. And Mia's head snapped up like she couldn't trust her ears, and Eleanor looked directly at her and softened again. Sweetheart, you didn't lose it, she said. It was taken. And Mia's lip trembled and she whispered, I thought I did something wrong. And something sharp flashed behind Eleanor's eyes, controlled fury. You did nothing wrong. And I felt my own throat tighten because that sentence was the exact opposite of what my family has been feeding girls like us for generations. And my mother started crying, not the clean kind of regret crying, the messy kind of fear crying. And people in the crowd began backing away, lowering drinks, pretending they needed to check on the grill, because nobody wants to be seen standing too close when the truth starts collecting collateral. And through it all, my dad kept trying to speak like he could negotiate his way out of consequences with tone. Eleanor, be reasonable. And Eleanor didn't raise her voice. She just said, try me. And that was the moment I saw it. My parents weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing what they built by treating me and my child as optional. And Mia pressed closer to my side, and I put my hand on her shoulder, and I said, clear enough for anyone to hear, Mia isn't second-tier family. And my mother's face twisted like she wanted to argue but couldn't find a script that wouldn't make her look like the villain she was. And Kayla muttered something about the kids, again like it was a magic word, and Eleanor's lawyer quietly slid one more sheet out of the folder and held it ready, and my stomach dropped when I saw the header, because it wasn't just eviction paperwork, it was a report filing confirmation, and Eleanor didn't announce it to the crowd. She said it to my parents like a private sentence that still sliced through the air. And just so we're clear, she said, this isn't staying in the family. And my dad's eyes widened. What did you do? And Eleanor's voice stayed calm. I did what you hoped nobody would do, she said. I involved people who don't care that you're a family. And right then, right on cue like the universe wanted the timing to hurt, a car door slammed out front, and footsteps approached the backyard gate. And the sound wasn't casual party footsteps. It was purposeful, and my mother's head snapped toward the gate like she'd just realized this wasn't a lecture. It was the beginning of a reckoning. Without leaving out even the littlest of detail, the footsteps got closer, and you could literally feel the backyard trying to pretend it was still a party, like the pool water could just sparkle hard enough to distract everyone from the fact that a family crime scene was unfolding next to the cooler. And my mother's hands were shaking so badly her plastic cup started clicking against her rings. That little nervous clatter that tells you someone's about to beg. And Kayla's face was doing this rapid math problem, trying to figure out who to blame before the new person even arrived. And my dad stood taller like posture could stop paperwork. But his eyes kept darting toward the gate like a trapped animal checking exits. And then the latch clicked again, and the gate swung open, and in walked a man I didn't recognize at first because he wasn't dressed like a cop. He wasn't dressed like a neighbor. He was dressed like a person who has delivered bad news so many times it stopped being personal years ago. Button-up shirt, slim folder, calm eyes, and behind him, two uniformed officers followed at a respectful distance, not dramatic, not shouting, just present enough to make the air go heavy, and the backyard went dead quiet because nothing kills small talk like the sight of police standing next to your new pool. And the man with the folder scanned the crowd like he was counting heads, then his gaze locked onto my dad. Thomas Hart, he said, not a question. And my dad's mouth opened like he was about to say something clever. But nothing came out fast enough, so he went with indignation. What is this? And the man didn't flinch. I'm a process server, he said. And I have documents for you and Vivian Hart and Kayla Hart. And Kayla snapped immediately, this is harassment, because Kayla always thinks volume is a legal defense. And one of the officers glanced at her like he was bored, not impressed, which somehow made Kayla quieter for half a second. And my mother started doing her wounded dove routine, palm to chest, voice trembling. Officer, there must be some mistake. And Eleanor didn't even look at the officers. She looked at my mother. There's no mistake, she said, and then she looked at me and Mia like she was anchoring us to the moment, and Mia's fingers had curled into my shirt so tight I could feel the pinch through the fabric, and I did the only thing I could do. I put my hand over hers so she felt my steadiness, because kids can survive almost anything if they know the adult next to them is not about to fold. And the process server stepped forward and held out the papers, and my dad didn't take them, so the man did what he's trained to do. He announced service out loud, so there was no "I never got it" later. You've been served, he said, and he placed the documents down on the outdoor table beside a tray of burger buns like this was just another item at the barbecue. And that visual alone made me want to laugh and throw up at the same time, because there is nothing more fitting for my family than consequences being delivered next to condiments. And my mother reached for the papers with 2 fingers like they were dirty, and her eyes darted across the top page, and her face strained so fast it looked like someone pulled a plug, and she whispered, "Oh my God." And my dad snatched the stack out of her hands and read with his lips moving, and the more he read, the more his jaw clenched, and Kayla leaned in. "What is it?" And my dad hissed, "Shut up," which was new, because my dad usually saves his sharpest words for me, not Kayla. But panic changes loyalties, and Eleanor spoke in that calm voice again. "There's a civil demand for restitution," she said, "and a criminal complaint for conversion and sale of property held in trust." And the crowd shifted like a flock of birds sensing a gunshot. People suddenly remembered they had kids to pick up, food to check, errands, anything. And it was almost comical how quickly the same relatives who clap for a pool reveal can turn into ghosts when the word criminal floats into the air, and Kayla started spinning. "This is insane. We didn't steal anything. It was in our house." And Eleanor corrected her like she was correcting a child's wrong answer on a quiz. "Being in your house does not make it yours." And then she said the sentence that hit hardest because it was so plain. "You sold Mia's future, and you called it family." And Kayla's cheeks flamed. "My kids needed joy, and I couldn't stop myself." I said, "So did mine." Not loud, not dramatic, just true. And my mother turned that anger toward me like I'd lit the match. "You could have handled this privately," she spat, and I stared at her. "Privately is where you do things you know are wrong." And the officer cleared his throat gently, not to threaten, more like to signal, "Keep it calm." And the process server pointed to a paragraph and said, "There's a hearing date noted here." And my dad's voice finally cracked in a different way, less angry, more scared. "A hearing," and the officer said, "Sir, we're here to keep the peace. We're not arresting anyone right now." And the phrase "right now" hung in the air like a warning label, and my mother's knees looked like they might give. She grabbed the back of a chair, and she did what she always does when she's cornered. She tried to make herself the victim. "Eleanor, how could you do this to your own daughter?" And Eleanor's face didn't change. She said, "I'm doing it for my great-granddaughter." And then, because Eleanor knows exactly where to aim, she added, "You're a grown woman who chose to participate." And my mother's eyes filled up with tears that weren't about love. They were about losing control of the story, and Kayla snapped again. "This is Emily's fault." And she pointed at me like the crowd was a jury. "She's always been jealous. She's always been dramatic." And I watched Mia's face tighten at the word dramatic, because Mia has heard that word used like a leash before, and I crouched slightly, turned my head toward her, and I said quietly, "Look at me." And Mia's eyes locked onto mine. "You didn't do anything wrong," I told her. And then I stood back up and faced Kayla. "You don't get to rewrite this," I said. You watched my kid walk into that music room and freeze like her heart stopped and you didn't care. And Kayla's mouth opened, but Eleanor cut her off again. Enough, Eleanor said, and the entire backyard obeyed without even realizing it, because when someone's authority is real, it doesn't need volume, and Eleanor turned to the officer and said, "Thank you," then turned back to my parents and Kayla. "You have 60 days to vacate," she repeated, "and you have 30 days to provide the accounting of where every dollar went." And my dad's head snapped up. "What accounting?" And Eleanor's lawyer spoke for the first time with that polite tone that makes you feel smaller, because the trust property was sold, the proceeds are traceable, and if they were used to improve the property. He paused and looked around at the pool like it offended him. "We can seek equitable remedies, including liens, restitution, and recovery." And my dad's face twisted. "You're taking the pool," and the lawyer didn't even smile. "We're taking back what was taken." And I swear the whole crowd inhaled at once, because that's when everyone realized the pool wasn't a symbol anymore. It was evidence, and my mother started pleading again. "Please, we can fix this, we can talk." And Eleanor's voice softened slightly, but not for her, for Mia. "Mia needs to see that adults correct wrong," she said, "not hide it." And Mia whispered, "Grandma Eleanor." And Eleanor immediately turned, her expression gentler. "Yes, love." And Mia's voice shook. "Do I get it back today?" And Eleanor nodded. "Not today, tomorrow." And Mia's eyes watered, but she didn't cry. She just nodded like she was accepting a promise from someone who never breaks them. And my mother took that moment to twist the knife in a different way. "You're turning her against us." And I snapped, not screaming, just sharp. "You turned her against you when you sold her cello." And that line landed because it was impossible to argue with without sounding evil. And even the relatives standing near the fence looked uncomfortable, like they wished they could unhear it. And Kayla tried to salvage her image in front of everyone. "This is so blown out of proportion," she said. "It's a cello. It's just a thing." And Mia finally spoke, quiet but clear. "It wasn't just a thing." And everyone froze, because when a child speaks truth in a room full of adults lying, it cuts deeper than any lawyer. And Kayla laughed nervously. "Sweetie, you'll understand when you're older." And Eleanor's eyes flashed. "She understands now," she said. "She understood when she walked into that room, and you left an empty corner where her future was supposed to be." And my dad, desperate, did the thing men like him always do. He tried to make it about respect. "Eleanor, you're embarrassing us." And Eleanor replied, "Good." And that single word was like a slap, because it told everyone what I'd been trying to say for years. Shame is not a weapon when you're finally on the right side of the truth. And then the officer stepped slightly closer and said to my dad, "Sir, I'm going to suggest everyone keeps it calm." And my dad's shoulders dropped a fraction, because even he knew he couldn't bully the law the way he bullies his daughters. And people began quietly gathering their things, not because the party was over, but because the illusion was. And I watched my mother's eyes dart around the crowd, realizing she'd lost her audience. And in a family like mine, losing the audience hurts more than losing the money. And then, just as I thought the worst of it was done, the process server lifted one more paper from his folder, looked directly at my dad, and said, "One more thing." And my dad's eyes narrowed. "What now?" And the man said, "The buyer of the cello has also filed a claim." And my stomach dropped, because that meant the person who bought it wasn't just some anonymous collector who'd disappear into the shadows. It meant they were close enough, angry enough, and organized enough to show up in the story. And Eleanor's lawyer added quietly, "And they want to speak with you." And right then, a black SUV rolled slowly up along the curb in front of the house, like it had been waiting for the exact moment the lie collapsed. The SUV didn't pull in like a neighbor arriving to swim. It rolled up slow and deliberate, like it knew it was about to ruin someone's day. Glossy black, tinted windows, the kind of vehicle that makes you sit up straighter even if you've done nothing wrong. and the second it stopped at the curb, my dad's face did this tiny twitch like his body recognized a threat before his ego could label it. And Kayla's eyes went wide because she's brave until consequences have headlights, and my mother's lips started moving silently like she was praying, but she wasn't praying for Mia. She was praying for herself. And then the rear door opened, and a man stepped out holding a hard case in one hand and a folder in the other. And I knew immediately this wasn't some random collector who bought a pretty instrument as decor, because the way he carried that case was careful, respectful, like you carry something that can break your heart if you drop it. And he wasn't alone either. A woman got out behind him, older than him by a decade or two, dressed in that clean professional way that says she's here to document and she will not be emotionally manipulated. And the man scanned the backyard like he was looking for a specific target, and then his eyes locked on my dad, and he walked in through the gate without asking, like the gate was a suggestion, not a boundary. And in my family, boundaries only exist for people like me anyway. So it was almost poetic watching someone else stroll past the invisible line my parents rely on, and the crowd parted like water because nobody wants to be standing too close when karma starts reading receipts out loud. And the man stopped about 6 feet from my dad, close enough to be heard, far enough to not be accused of threatening. And he said, calm but sharp, "Thomas Hart." And my dad tried to recover his dignity. "Who are you?" And the man lifted the folder slightly. "My name is Grant Holloway," he said, "and I'm the person you sold an antique cello to." And my dad's throat bobbed as he swallowed, and Kayla's hand flew to her mouth like she just remembered she has a conscience. And my mother rushed in with that syrupy tone that makes strangers suspicious instantly. "Sir, this isn't the time." And Grant looked at her like she was a lamp that started talking. "Actually," he said, "it's the perfect time, because you all threw a party for the thing you bought with money that wasn't yours." And the word party hit like a slap, because it turned the pool reveal into what it actually was, a public celebration of theft. And my dad's voice got tight. "We didn't steal anything, it was in our home." And Grant didn't even blink. "So was my wallet when your contractor left his tools in your driveway," Grant said. "Does that make it yours too?" And a couple people in the crowd made that uncomfortable cough laugh sound because they wanted to laugh but didn't want to take sides. And that's when I realized something that stung. My parents were used to social protection. They were used to people choosing politeness over truth. But Grant didn't grow up in our little world of appearances. He came with facts, and facts don't care about your reputation. And then Eleanor's lawyer stepped slightly forward. Polite voice. "Mr. Holloway, thank you for coming. I'm Andrew Sloan." And Grant nodded. "I spoke to your office." And then he turned back to my dad and held up a single sheet of paper from his folder. "This," he said, "is the bill of sale you signed." And my dad's eyes flicked down like his brain was trying to erase ink with willpower, and Grant continued. "And this," he said, sliding out another document, "is the appraisal and insurance record that identifies the instrument as trust property belonging to a minor." And Kayla immediately blurted, "We didn't know." Because that's the family anthem when the mask falls. "We didn't know. We didn't mean it. We thought it was fine." And Grant's eyes narrowed. "You didn't know," he repeated, "but you knew it was valuable enough to sell for $87,000 in a rush." And my mother's voice cracked. "We needed the money for the children." And Grant's head tilted slightly. "For which children?" he asked, and the silence after that was brutal. Because everyone knew the answer, and no one wanted to say it out loud. And Mia squeezed my hand again, and I felt anger rise up like heat behind my eyes, not because of the money anymore, but because this whole situation was teaching my child a lesson about who gets protected in families like ours, and I refused to let that be the lesson she carried. And then Grant did something that changed the temperature of the whole moment. He set the hard case down gently on the patio table, the same table my mother had arranged with napkins and fancy chips to impress relatives, and he clicked the latches open, slow and deliberate, and the sound of those latches popping was louder than it should have been, like a countdown. And my mother whispered, "No." And my dad took one step forward. "You can't." And Grant said, "I can." And he lifted the lid, and inside was the cello. Mia's cello. That dark, rich wood. The curve of it like a living thing. And Mia made this tiny sound in her throat that wasn't crying. It was recognition. Like her body recognized home before her mind could process it. And then she took a step toward it without realizing, like gravity pulled her, and I watched her face. The way her eyes lit and then flickered with fear because she still didn't trust good things to stay. And that broke something in me. Because children should not learn that hope is unsafe. And Eleanor's voice softened for Mia. "Sweetheart," she said. "It's here." And Mia's hand lifted halfway and froze in the air like she was afraid to touch it and make it disappear. And Grant looked at Mia and his expression changed. The anger softened into something like responsibility, and he said, "I didn't know." And when he said it, it sounded different than my family's version, because his didn't mean excuse, his meant truth. "I bought it through a broker," he said. "I was told it was an estate piece being liquidated." And he glanced at my dad. "And you were very quick to accept the wire." And my dad bristled. "We didn't force you to buy it." And Grant nodded slowly. "No," he said. "It didn't force me. You deceived me." And then he turned to Eleanor's lawyer. "When your office contacted me and asked for the instrument's serial identifiers and photos," he said, "I pulled the files, and that's when I realized what I'd been handed." And he looked back at Mia. "I've played cello for 30 years, he said. "And I've worked with youth music programs." And then he pointed gently to the bridge area. "This instrument has been set up for a young player," he said. "You can tell by the adjustments, and you don't need to be a musician to know that a child's instrument should never be treated like a cash machine." And the crowd shifted again, because now this wasn't just family drama. It was public moral failure, and people hate being around that because it makes them question what they've enabled. And my mother started crying for real now. Messy, humiliating, because the facade was gone. And she grabbed my dad's arm like he could save her from embarrassment. But he yanked away because he was busy saving himself, and Kayla stepped forward, voice sharp. "So what? You're just giving it back." And Grant looked at her like she was missing the entire point on purpose. "I'm returning stolen property," he said, "and I'm seeking restitution from the people who sold it." And Kayla snapped. "We already spent the money." And Grant nodded. "I know," he said. "I saw the pool." And that line was so clean and cold a few people actually flinched, and then Eleanor's lawyer added, "The restitution will be pursued through proper channels." And my dad barked, "This is ridiculous." And then Eleanor finally stepped forward, calm as ever. "Thomas," she said, "you used to tell Emily that actions have consequences." And my dad's face twisted. "Don't do that." And Eleanor didn't stop. "You used to punish her for spilling a glass of milk," she said, "and now you want mercy for selling a child's inheritance." And my dad's mouth opened and nothing came out, because you can't argue with a mirror when it's finally facing you. And Kayla started turning red. "You're enjoying this?" She hissed at me, like I'd orchestrated it, and I looked at her. "No," I said, "I'm surviving it." And then I turned to Mia because she was the center of this, not their shame, and I said softly, "Do you want to touch it?" And Mia looked at Eleanor like she needed permission, and Eleanor nodded. "Yes, love." And Mia stepped closer, and she ran her fingers along the side of the cello like she was checking if it was real, and her shoulders dropped just a little, like her body finally exhaled. And in that exact moment, I realized how deep the damage had gone, because my child was treating her own instrument like it was a fragile promise, not a belonging, and I wanted to turn around and scream at every adult who taught her that. But instead I did something better. I stayed steady, I stayed present, and I let her have the moment without making it about my anger. And then Grant closed the case gently and looked at Eleanor's lawyer. "My attorney will contact you," he said, "and I'm willing to provide a statement." And the officer nodded, and the process server gathered his empty folder like his job was done. and the backyard was silent in the way a room is silent after someone says the thing everyone knows but nobody wanted said. And then my mother did the predictable thing. She tried to pull Mia back into the family script. She crouched slightly, forced a smile. "Sweetie, see, everything's fine." And Mia didn't move toward her. She moved toward Eleanor, and my mother's smile cracked like dry paint, and Kayla hissed under her breath, "Ungrateful." And that word made my skin go cold, because that's the word they use to keep people small. They take from you, and then demand gratitude for what they didn't destroy. And I snapped my head toward Kayla. "Don't," I said, and Kayla blinked like she'd never been challenged in public, and Eleanor's voice landed like a gavel. "This is over," she said, and then she looked at me. "Emily, take Mia home." And I nodded, and we started walking toward the gate, and my dad called after me. "So you're just going to let this happen?" And I stopped and turned, and I looked him dead in the eyes, and I said, "You already let it happen." And his face went tight with rage, but behind it was fear, because he knew the next phase wasn't social embarrassment anymore. It was legal and financial and permanent. And as I walked out with Mia and Eleanor, I could hear the pool party dying behind us, chairs scraping, awkward goodbyes, relatives suddenly allergic to staying, and then Eleanor said something quietly as we reached the front walkway, something that made my stomach flip again. "This was the easy part," she said, and I looked at her. "What do you mean?" And Eleanor's eyes stayed forward. "They didn't just sell the cello," she said. "They moved other things too." And my heart sank, because in families like mine, once they discover stealing works, they don't stop at one item, and Eleanor added. "And now we find out how far they went." And behind us, my mother's voice rose, not crying now, furious. "Mom, you're destroying this family." And Eleanor didn't even turn around. She just said, "No, Vivian." And her tone was calm as ice. "I'm saving the child." We got home, and Mia didn't even want to eat. She went straight to her room with that hard case like it was a rescued pet that might run away if you blink, and she set it down gently, too gently, like she was scared the universe might accuse her of being dramatic for caring about the thing that was literally hers. And I sat on the edge of her bed and watched her open the case again, just to see it, just to confirm it hadn't vanished. And she ran her fingertips along the varnish and whispered, "It smells like home again." And that sentence punched me in the throat, because an 11-year-old shouldn't have to talk like a woman who's been robbed and returned to the ruins to see what's left. And then Eleanor walked into my kitchen like a general walking into a war room, calm face, sharp eyes, no wasted movement. And she set a slim folder on my counter and said, "Before you spiral, listen carefully." And I laughed once, because of course she clocked me. I was already spiraling internally. I was doing that thing where your brain starts playing every memory back like security footage. Every time my mother said, "Just leave it here for now." Every time my dad said, "It's safer at our place." Every time Kayla smirked in that music room like it was a closet of toys, and Eleanor said, "When I told you they moved other things, I meant it literally," and I felt my body go cold. And I said, "What things?" And Eleanor didn't answer with feelings. She answered with facts. 2 days after I moved into the community, your father called an estate auction house, she said. Not a local one either, one that specializes in private collections, the kind of place that doesn't ask many questions if the seller looks respectable. And I stared at her, because I didn't even know my dad knew what an estate auction house was. And Eleanor continued, "They sent a rep to the house on a Wednesday," she said. "Midday, while Kayla's children were at school, and while you were at work, and they photographed items in the music room, the hallway cabinet, and the upstairs storage closet." And I said, "How do you know this?" And Eleanor's mouth tightened. "Because I built my life assuming someone would try," she said. "And because I keep records." And she slid a printed email chain toward me. And there it was, my father's name, his phone number, a polite exchange. "Thank you for your inquiry, Mr. Hart. We can arrange discreet valuation." And my skin crawled, and I said, "So they tried to sell more?" And Eleanor nodded. Tried and may have succeeded in smaller ways before the cello. And that's when the anger rose up again, because the cello wasn't an impulsive one-off. It was a pattern, it was a test. It was them learning what they could get away with once the last adult who had stopped them was removed from the house. And I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through old texts like a detective with a bad haircut. And there were little things that suddenly looked huge. My mom texting me, "We're reorganizing the house, don't worry about the music room stuff." Kayla posting, "Decluttering feels so good," with a photo of boxes stacked in the hallway. My dad saying, "We moved some valuables to keep them safe during construction." And it hit me like a wave. Safe from who? Safe from what? Safe from the actual owner. And then Eleanor said, "Andrew is pulling the property file tomorrow." And I blinked. "The property file?" And she nodded. "I want to see if your father tried to leverage the house." And I laughed because it sounded insane. And then I stopped laughing because I remembered the smell of renovation. The way the pool looked too polished for the budget my parents always complained about. The way my dad's contractor acted like he'd been paid fast and in cash. And I said, "You think they borrowed against your house?" And Eleanor looked me in the eyes. "I think they treated my home like their bank," she said. And right then my phone buzzed, and it was my mother, and I almost didn't answer. But Eleanor held up a hand like, "Answer it, let them talk," and I put it on speaker, and my mom's voice came through strained and trembling. "Emily, we need to talk." And I said, "About what?" And she did that thing she always does where she tries to frame herself as the wounded party. "You embarrassed us," she said, "in front of everyone." And I felt my hands shake, and I said, "You sold my child's cello." And my mom snapped, "We didn't know it was in a trust." And Eleanor murmured, just loud enough for my mom to hear, "You knew it wasn't yours." And my mom went silent for half a second, and then she pivoted. "Okay, fine," she said, "but you could have handled this privately." And I laughed, harsh and short. "Privately, like how you handled selling it privately." And my mom's voice rose. "We are your parents." And I said, "That makes it worse." And then my dad's voice cut in. Because of course he was on another phone, always hiding behind the illusion of separate conversations. "You're going to ruin your sister's children's summer," he said, like that was the tragedy here. And I said, "You already ruined Mia's." And my dad said, "Mia has her cello back, so drop it." And Eleanor leaned closer to my phone and said, calm and lethal, "Thomas, did you call an estate auction house on Wednesday?" And I swear I could hear my father's soul leave his body through the line. There was this tiny intake of breath, and then he tried the oldest trick in the book, denial with offense. "I don't know what you're talking about." And Eleanor replied, "Good," she said, "because tomorrow my attorney is requesting records, and if I find even one more trust asset missing, I won't just evict you. I will press charges." And my mom started crying again. Loud now, performative. "Mom, please," she wailed into the call, as if begging her own mother in public would reset the scoreboard. And Eleanor didn't flinch. "You can cry," she said, "or you can return what you took." And then she ended the call, just like that, no goodbye, no softness. And I sat there staring at the dark screen because I realized something brutal. My parents weren't scared of hurting Mia. They were scared of being exposed. They were scared of losing comfort. And the moment comfort was threatened, they turned into different people. Or maybe they always were those people, and I was just late to seeing it. And then Mia walked into the kitchen, clutching her rosin tin like a security object, and she asked quietly, "Are they going to take it again?" And I felt my chest compress, because what kind of question is that for a kid? And Eleanor answered before I could. "No," she said, "because now there are adults who will not allow it." And Eleanor sat Mia down and explained it in the simplest way. "Some people confuse love with ownership," she said, "and when they do, they think they can take what you have and call it family. But family doesn't steal from children." And Mia nodded slowly, like she was storing the sentence somewhere deep for later, when she'd need it. And then the next morning was where the real nightmare began, because Andrew called at 9:12 a.m. precise, and Eleanor put him on speaker. And he said, "Margaret, we have an issue." And Eleanor's face stayed calm, but her fingers tightened on the mug she was holding, and Andrew said, "There's a lien application in process." And I felt my stomach drop through the floor, and I said, "A lien?" And Andrew replied, "A home equity line of credit application tied to the property." And my head started spinning. They tried to take a loan on the house, and Andrew said, "Worse." And Eleanor's eyes narrowed, and Andrew continued, "The application includes a signed authorization under a power of attorney." And the kitchen went silent. Mia froze mid-step, and Eleanor's voice came out low. "They filed a POA," and Andrew said, "It appears so." And I could feel my pulse in my ears, and I said, "But you never gave them power of attorney." And Eleanor replied, "No." And she looked at me like she was watching 2 decades of family rot line up in a row. And then Andrew delivered the line that made my skin crawl. "The signature resembles yours, Margaret, but it does not match your known signing pattern." And Eleanor didn't gasp. She didn't curse. She just said, "Forgery." And Andrew said, "That's our working assumption." And for a second my brain refused to accept it, because selling a cello is one kind of evil. Forging legal control over an elder's property is another. It's predatory, it's calculated. It's the kind of thing people do when they think no one will challenge them. And then Eleanor said, "Send me everything." And Andrew said, "Already on its way." And then he added, "Also, the bank flagged something else." And Eleanor's eyes stayed steady. "Say it." And Andrew said, "They listed the pool renovation as a medical accessibility improvement to justify urgency." And I felt my mouth fall open, because that is a lie with paperwork on it, a lie that uses old age as a costume. And Mia looked at me confused, and I forced my face calm for her, but inside I was screaming. And Eleanor stood up, slow, deliberate, like she was putting on armor, and she said, "Thomas thinks I'm a woman he can manage." And then she looked at me. "Emily, I need you to do something today." And I said, "Anything." And she replied, "Go to the house," she said, "and take photos of every room, every cabinet, every drawer they had access to, and do it like you're documenting a crime scene, because you are." And I nodded, and then she added, "Do not go alone." And I asked, "Why?" And she said, "Because people who forge paperwork don't stop at paperwork." And I felt the air leave my lungs, and then my phone buzzed again, and this time it was Kayla, not my mom, and her message was short. "You better fix this." And I stared at it, and I realized we weren't just dealing with theft and favoritism anymore. We were dealing with panic, and panic makes people sloppy, and sloppy people make big mistakes. And I turned to Eleanor and said, "They're gonna try something." And Eleanor nodded, like she already knew, like she'd known since the moment she smelled that renovation. And she said quietly, "Yes." And then she picked up her phone and made one call, and I only heard her side, calm voice. "Hello, Detective Marlowe. It's Margaret Price." And my blood ran cold at the name, because that's not a call you make unless the line has been crossed so far it can't be walked back. And Eleanor glanced at Mia playing with her rosin tin, and then she looked at me and said, "By tonight, your parents will realize they didn't just steal from a child." She said, "They tried to steal from the law." And as she spoke, my phone buzzed again, and this time it was a notification from the neighborhood app. A blurry photo posted by a neighbor, caption, "Moving truck at the Hart House. Anyone know what's going on?" And I zoomed in, and my stomach flipped, because the truck wasn't parked out front like a normal move. It was backed up to the side entrance by the study, the door that led straight to the music room, and I could see boxes being carried out. And I realized in 1/6 second exactly what my parents were doing. They weren't waiting 60 days. They were trying to disappear evidence before anyone could stop them. I stared at that neighborhood app photo until my eyes started doing that blurry tunnel thing, because once you see a moving truck backed up to the side entrance, you don't unsee it. And I didn't have the luxury of sitting there processing it like a normal person. I grabbed my keys, called my friend Tasha in one breath, and said, "I need you to ride with me right now, no questions, I'll explain in the car." And then I went to Mia's room, crouched to her level, and said, Sweetheart, you're staying with Eleanor for a little bit, okay? And she nodded like she'd been practicing bravery in secret, and Eleanor didn't even ask why. She just slid her phone into her pocket, pulled Mia close, and said, "Go." In that way that isn't comforting, it's commanding, because she could feel something ugly moving in the background. And then Tasha pulled up outside my building in 2 minutes flat, hair in a scarf, slippers on, eyes wide. And the second I got in, she said, "Emily, your voice sounded like you saw a ghost." And I said, "Not a ghost, a moving truck." And then I told her the short version while we drove, and by the time I finished, Tasha's face had shifted into that quiet anger that comes when someone hurts a child and tries to call it family. And she said, "So they're stealing the evidence." And I said, "They're trying." And I stepped on the gas, and the whole drive I kept seeing Mia's face asking if they were going to take it again, and I kept hearing my dad's voice saying, "Drop it," like my daughter's future was a receipt he could crumple and toss. And we turned into my parents' street, and there were cars lined up because of course there were. My family loves an audience, but this time the audience wasn't invited for a party. It was just neighbors rubbernecking, the kind of people who pretend they're watering plants while their eyes are glued to the drama. And there it was, the moving truck. A white box truck with the back open like a giant mouth and 2 men in. Work gloves were hauling sealed boxes out of the side door. Not just random clutter either, carefully taped, labeled, handled like valuables, and my stomach clenched because regular moving doesn't look like that. It looks messy. It looks like someone's life spilling out. This looked like extraction, like a cleanup crew, and I parked half crooked, didn't care, and Tasha said, "Wait, what's the plan?" And I said, "The plan is I walk in like I still have a right to walk in," and I marched up the driveway. And the first thing that hit me was the smell again. Paint and chlorine and that chemical sharpness of money spent fast. And I pushed through the side door because I still had a key, and that fact alone made me furious now because my key didn't mean trust, it meant I was useful. And inside the house was chaos disguised as organization, the kind of chaos where everything is boxed and labeled but the air feels panicked, like someone is moving under duress. And I heard my mother's voice from the kitchen, tight and urgent. "Make sure those are in the truck first." And then she saw me and her face did something strange. It didn't go to surprise. It went straight to anger, like my presence was the crime. And she snapped, "Emily, what are you doing here?" And I didn't even answer her question. I went straight to the truth. "What are you moving?" And she flinched. Not because she was scared of me, but because she wasn't ready to have to invent a lie on the spot. And my father stepped into view behind her, jaw set, eyes already blaming me for whatever mess he'd made, and he said, "You need to leave." And I said, "Not until you tell me what you're taking out of this house." And then Kayla appeared from the hallway, phone in hand like she was calling someone, and she said, "Oh my God, you're such a problem." And Tasha walked in right behind me and said, calm as ice, "Funny." I was about to say the same thing. And my mother's eyes darted to Tasha like she was trying to calculate social risk, because my mom only understands consequences when they come from witnesses, and my dad said, "This is private family business." And I said, "You made it public when you sold a child's instrument for $87,000, and he barked. We already returned it." And I shot back, "After you got caught." And that's when I noticed the boxes in the hall had handwritten labels. Not kitchen or linens, but documents, records, music room, and one box that literally said Andrew, like they were sorting what belonged to Eleanor's attorney. And my blood ran cold, because that wasn't moving, that was hiding. And I stepped forward and ripped the top off the nearest box, and my mother gasped like I'd slapped her. And inside were folders, thick ones, manila with tabs, the kind Eleanor keeps, the kind that say, "Don't try me," without saying it. And I flipped one open and saw appraisal, photos, serial number sheets, insurance paperwork, and my throat tightened because they weren't just hiding the pool receipts, they were hiding Eleanor's proof. And my dad lunged forward, "Don't touch that." And Tasha moved between us instantly, palm up. "Back up," she said. And my dad froze because he's a bully, but he's not brave. And I looked at my mom and said, You're stealing from your own mother now, too." And my mom's face crumpled into that weaponized helplessness. "We're trying to protect ourselves," she whispered, and I laughed, bitter. "From what? Accountability?" And then Kayla hissed, "This is because you're jealous." And I turned slowly and looked at her like she'd grown a second head. "Jealous," I repeated. "Of what? Your kids swimming in stolen money." And she snapped, "It's a pool for the kids." And I said, "Mia is a kid." And Kayla's face tightened because she hates that simple truth. She hates how clean it is, and I could hear one of the movers outside asking, "Another? Where do we put this?" And my mom shouted back, "Truck, too fast, too sharp." And it hit me then, they weren't just trying to disappear paperwork, they were trying to disappear the timeline, because once the lien and the fake power of attorney got investigated, they needed to look like they were already leaving, already cooperating, already confused, already misunderstood. And I looked at Tasha and said quietly, "Call Eleanor right now." And Tasha did without asking, and while she spoke, I pulled my phone out and started recording video, panning across the hallway, the boxes, the labels, my parents' faces, because I learned something from people like them. If it isn't documented, it didn't happen. And my dad's eyes widened when he saw my camera, and he said, "Turn that off." And I said, "No." And he stepped toward me and his voice dropped low, "You're ruining this family." And I felt my whole body go still, because that sentence is their favorite trick when they do something unforgivable. They accuse you of being the one breaking the home. And I said, "You ruined it when you took from my child and called it improvement." And then my mom suddenly changed tactics. She reached for my arm, soft voice, tears ready. "Emily, please, Mia has her cello. Let's just stop." And I jerked back, "Don't touch me." And she blinked like I'd slapped her, because in her mind, she's allowed to touch me when she wants control. And then Kayla snapped again. "You're acting like we murdered someone." And I turned to her and said, "You killed trust." And she scoffed, "Trust doesn't pay bills." And that's when I realized she'd told on herself, because this was never about the kids. It was about bills. It was about lifestyle. It was about entitlement. And I wanted to ask you something right here, and don't dodge it, because I know some of you are watching this with your jaw clenched thinking, but they're your parents. So let me ask you straight. Where are you watching from? And do you think blood gives someone a license to steal from your child? Because I need to know if you would have stayed quiet or if you would have done exactly what I did next. And what I did next was I walked past my mother like she was air, marched straight to the study, and opened the cabinet where Eleanor kept the trust binder when she lived here. And it was empty. The shelf dust outline was there like a ghost of where it used to sit. And my heart slammed because the binder wasn't in the boxes I'd opened, which meant it was already on that truck, and I ran back into the hall and shouted, "Stop loading," and the movers paused, confused, because they weren't paid to be in the middle of family fraud, and my dad yelled, "Keep going." And I said, "You touch one more box and I call the police." And my dad laughed, short and ugly. "Go ahead," he said. "You think they'll believe you?" And in that exact moment, like the universe has timing, Tasha's phone went on speaker and Eleanor's voice filled the hallway, calm, sharp. "Emily, I'm on my way with Detective Marlowe." And my mom's face drained so fast it was almost impressive, because there are two kinds of fear. Fear of being caught, and fear of being caught by someone who doesn't care about your excuses. And my dad's mouth tightened, and he hissed she wouldn't. And I said, "She already did." And then a neighbor's voice floated in from outside. "Everything okay over there?" The nosy one. And my dad forced a smile and shouted back, "All good." And then he turned to me and his eyes went flat and he said quietly, "You're making an enemy out of your own father." And I leaned in and said, "You made an enemy out of me when you decided my child's future was in Aiden." And then Kayla started yelling at my mom. My mom started pleading with my dad. My dad started barking at the movers to hurry. And the whole house turned into exactly what it always was under the nice holiday photos, a panic machine that runs on control. And I ran outside to the truck, climbed up on the edge like I was about to jump in, and I saw it. The trust binder, black, embossed, tucked under a stack of boxes marked seasonal, like they thought hiding it under Christmas decor would make it invisible, and I grabbed it and yanked it out, and one of the movers said, "Ma'am, we can't." And I said, "This is stolen." And then behind me I heard the sound that made my spine lock, the crunch of tires on gravel, a car pulling into the driveway fast. And when I turned, I saw a police cruiser stopping at the curb, and my father's face in the doorway, not angry anymore, not smug anymore, but calculating, like a man deciding whether to run or fight. And then he did something I did not expect at all. He pointed at me and shouted, loud enough for the officer to hear, "She's trespassing and stealing." And the officer's door opened, and for 1/6 I realized my dad's last move was going to be the same move he's always used. Flip the story, make the truth look like the crime. And the officer started walking toward me as my mom began to cry on cue, and Kayla whispered, "Finally," like she'd been waiting for this. And I held that binder to my chest and thought, okay, if they want to play dirty in front of the law, then we're about to find out how far they've really gone. The officer walked toward me with that cautious, measured pace cops use when they don't yet know who the problem is, and my dad stood in the doorway with his arm half raised like he'd just pointed at a criminal on a security camera, and my mother's crying turned on like a faucet, the same dramatic sniffle she uses at church when she wants sympathy without confession, and Kayla was behind her whispering, "She's always been unstable," loud enough for the officer to catch a piece of it, because, of course, she was going to try to paint me as the family's little glitch in the system, and I held the trust binder tight against my chest like it could physically keep the truth from getting stolen again, and the officer said, "Ma'am, step down from the truck." And I didn't argue or yell because yelling is what guilty people do when they want the scene to feel chaotic. I stepped down slowly, set my phone on record in my hand, and said, calm, "Officer, I'm not trespassing. I have a key, and this binder belongs to my grandmother's trust. They removed it from the house and loaded it onto a truck without her consent." And my dad snapped, "It's our house." And the officer looked between us like he was mentally flipping a coin, and then another car door shut behind him, and the air shifted, because Detective Marlowe walked up the driveway with Eleanor right beside him. Not rushing, not flustered, just that steady older person stride that says, "I've seen worse than you." And Eleanor didn't even glance at the pool hole or the moving truck first. She looked straight at my father like he was a stain she finally decided to scrub, and she said, "Thomas," in a tone that made my dad's shoulders tense, and my mom whispered, "Mom," like she was about to beg, and Eleanor didn't let her. She held up her hand and said, "Save it." And then she looked at the officer and said, "That binder is mine, and those documents are part of an active trust, and I did not authorize anyone to move them, sell anything, or remove my property from this home." And my father tried to jump in with that fake confident voice, "Mother, you're confused, you've been stressed." And Detective Marlowe's head tilted slightly, and he said, "Sir, let's not do that," like he'd heard that exact line 1,000 times from people who weaponize age to cover their own behavior. And my mother's crying sputtered, because when your favorite tactic gets shut down, your body doesn't know what to do next. And Eleanor nodded at me. "Give it here." So I handed her the binder, and she opened it right there in the driveway, flipping tabs like she was reading them out loud in her head, and she pulled out a page and held it up for the officer and said, "This trust lists the instrument, identifies it, and names my great-granddaughter as beneficiary. And this house is also addressed in my estate planning, which is why I warned everyone years ago, do not touch what you do not own." And the officer's posture changed, just slightly, because now it wasn't family drama, it was paperwork, and paperwork is the language police trust more than tears. And my dad's face tightened as he realized he couldn't bully a binder, and Kayla scoffed, "So what? We can't even have a pool for our kids." And Eleanor turned her head slowly toward Kayla and said, "You can have whatever you can afford." And Kayla's mouth opened like she wanted to scream. But no sound came out, because even she knew how ugly it sounded when set in front of a detective, and the officer asked, "Where is the instrument now?" And Eleanor didn't look at me. She looked at Detective Marlowe and said, "Recovered." And then she pointed toward the truck and said, "And that truck is moving evidence." And that word, evidence, hit my dad like a slap, because it meant this was officially bigger than a family argument, and the movers started backing away from the truck, hands up in the universal sign of "not my problem," and my dad suddenly pivoted to a softer tone. "Can we talk inside?" And Detective Marlowe said, "No, we can talk right here." And then Eleanor did the one thing that made me proud and sick at the same time. She explained the story in a clean timeline like a prosecutor, not a grandma. She said, "I moved into assisted living 6 weeks ago, and within days of me leaving, my daughter and son-in-law sold a protected instrument belonging to my great-granddaughter. They used the funds for a pool renovation for my other grandchildren. And when I discovered it, I initiated recovery, and now they are attempting to remove documents from my home to hide the trust structure and transaction trail." And my mom whispered, "We didn't know." And Eleanor didn't raise her voice. She just said, "You knew enough to tell Emily not to tell me." And that shut my mother right down, because that's the truth people can't argue with, not without confessing. And my dad tried again. It was sitting there. We thought it was family property. And Detective Marlowe said, "Did you have written permission to sell it?" And my dad hesitated for half a second, and half a second is all the law needs, and my dad said, "No." And Detective Marlowe nodded and said, "Okay." The way you say "okay" when the case just picked a direction, and then everything that followed happened fast but also felt slow. The officer asked the movers for the bill of lading, checked labels, took photos, and my dad's voice got quieter with every step, because he could feel control slipping, and Kayla started whispering to my mom like, "What do we do? What do we do?" And my mom just stared at the ground like she'd finally run out of scripts, and I stood beside Mia's grandmother, watching the adults in my life meet consequences like they'd never seen them before, and I realized the moral lesson in real time, not in a cute quote, but in something ugly and practical. People don't respect boundaries you don't enforce, family included, especially family and detective. Marlowe asked Eleanor if she wanted to file a formal report, and Eleanor said, "Already filed." And the officer looked at my dad and said, "Sir, we're going to need you to stop this move until we sort ownership and potential evidence." And my dad's jaw clenched, because that truck was his exit plan, his story rewrite, and it just got blocked. And then my mother tried one last time. She reached toward Eleanor's arm and said, "Mom, please." And Eleanor stepped back and said, "You don't get to touch me after you touched her future." And I felt my throat tighten, because she wasn't talking about me. She was talking about Mia, and at that moment, my phone buzzed with a text from Tasha. "Mia says, is it safe now?" And I looked up at the house and realized the weirdest part wasn't the pool or the truck or the police. The weirdest part was how quiet it was inside me, because for once, I wasn't begging, I wasn't explaining, I wasn't hoping someone would finally choose us. We were choosing us, and then Eleanor turned to me and said, "Go pick up Mia," and I nodded. And as I walked back to my car, my dad called my name, not angry now, not smug, just scared, "Emily." And I stopped but didn't turn around, and he said, "You're really doing this?" And I finally turned and said, "No, Dad, you did this, I'm just not covering it up anymore." And I drove away with the binder's weight still in my chest, even though it wasn't in my hands. And when I picked Mia up, she ran to me and asked, "Did they take it again?" And I knelt, looked her in the eyes, and said, "No, sweetheart, and nobody gets to take it from you ever again." And she held my neck like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. And I'll tell you something I didn't expect. That night she practiced, and the first note that came out wasn't just music. It sounded like relief, like the room itself unclenched. And I watched her and thought about every kid who learns to shrink because adults won't act right. And I want you to answer me honestly, because this is where the comment section gets real. If this happened to your child, would you have stayed polite to keep peace? Or would you have burned the piece to protect the future? And don't give me the fake, "I'd handle it privately" line, because private is where people like this thrive. And then, just when I thought the worst of it was over, Eleanor called me late and said they did more than sell the cello, and my stomach dropped because I knew that tone. That tone means there's a second layer, and she said, "Tomorrow, I'm showing you the bank trail. And if you think the pool money was the big betrayal, wait until you see what else they treated like family assets." Because the next story I'm posting is the one that explains how this kind of entitlement doesn't start with a cello. It starts years earlier with small thefts everyone ignores until the numbers get big. And you're going to want to watch that one because it'll teach you exactly how to protect your own family from the same kind of smiling, gaslighting robbery.